Hosted by Dr. Alex G. on behalf of Serve Wisconsin AmeriCorps, Transform Your Leadership invites you as an AmeriCorps member to engage your own journey and transformation as you become leaders who enrich lives and communities. Now here's Dr. G.
Well, good morning. We're back together again. And good morning to those of you that are joining us digitally. I'll try not to ignore you this time. Maybe even have some special sessions. I know you're not here just to hear me talk or give a speech, but I have a couple of things that I'd like to work with us on or have us talk through. But I'm just curious, as you've been listening to the podcast series, and no judgment if you're not caught up, I'm not even caught up on my own podcast series. And so, of course, I live through it and listen to it as I'm recording it. Sometimes it's hard to hear my own voice, but I fall behind a little bit. So no judgment at all. But particularly last time, because we had a series talking about self-care or working through tough space, I'm just curious if you had any thoughts, insights, questions that you wanted to bring up or mention before we got into our assignment activities for today. Do you remember what we actually named those sessions?
Transformational leadership in difficult job situations.
The subtitle of that is when your coworkers and bosses piss you off.
And then self-care in transformational
Sure.
leadership.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. So any questions? Oh yes.
I go for the hard questions right away.
No, that's all right. Those are both great questions. So the first question is, what happens when self-care is spoken of as a value, but when you want to put it into practice, it's not supported? And I'm just making sure that folks online can hear. And the second question is, how do you advocate for transformational leadership values or transformational values when, again, lip service is given to it? How do you address those things without seeming confrontational or angry or those kinds of things? Wow, you're right. You're starting off right with the tough questions. I love that. Before I'm processing it, would anyone like to weigh in on the first part of the question? Have you had experience with that same kind of pushback about your self-care, and you found a way to do that? Because I love having this learning community, and then I'll throw some points in. Yes. And just tell me your first name again.
Alicia.
Thank you, Alicia.
I used to be a high school teacher, and I see this at other organizations.
Sure.
Schools where part of your daily job should involve some self-care, right? Like the way you can budget your time, but you are given a lot of stressful situations, and then they say like, oh, we'll offer yoga for free, like an hour every 6 months, and that's the self-care that we're going to offer you, but not necessarily recognizing that, any of us who work, especially with students, right, or anybody who struggles at all, like that is taxing, and having some strategies or organizational systems that come from above that leave you the space to manage those better is I find that much more helpful. Not that yoga's bad, but right, like that's gonna make me better at my job and more like, less emotionally exhausted than my job being really stressful and then like one yoga hour that they offer every 6 months.
That's helpful. I saw another hand. Yes.
Hi, Todd.
Thank you, Todd.
One of the best things someone told me once, and it was probably a black woman who stuff, told me that one of the challenges of self-care is that there's an expectation of resiliency on the person, and that's where the conversation always gets stuck, and there's no comment on the environment that someone's inside of. And then having a conversation about both, a proper level of resiliency, but resiliency is not should not be your continual state. Like you should be thriving, like in a place. But then also talking about what is the environment expecting of them. So I heard in the original question, is there a misunderstanding of the expectation of the environment versus the need for someone just to somehow magically be able to survive the environment?
That's real good feedback. Anyone else? When employers offer time off for trainings, maybe one like we're in today, it might be helpful to go back and say, we had an interesting workshop today about the subject of self-care. I'd like to have a conversation about that sometime and what it really looks like. I have a different work style than probably most of my employees. My wife and I have been married 32 years in June, and we work together in on the church side of our work, not the nonprofit organization, but we have completely different work styles. And so I'm learning the importance of self-care, but I'm also a recovering class clown, jokester. I'm the party waiting to happen. But at the same time, I know how to take a break in the middle of the day because I get a call from a friend who has a long layover in Milwaukee. Hey, do you want to have lunch? I can drive over, hang out, get home, and step until 3 o'clock in the morning, still getting the project done so that I don't miss a beat. But for me, being able to have that space, now again, everyone doesn't have that luxury. This is an organization I run. I've been at it for 30 years. But I've been able to convey to my leadership team that I'm committed to the task. And so maybe this can be rooted into a discussion of, let's be really clear about what the outcomes are for my position, because I will always, to the best of my ability, meet those goals and those responsibilities. But I might not be around until 7 o'clock on this day because I do weekly yoga or twice a week yoga, not once every 6 months, or bowling or whatever it is, walking, exercising, time with friends. But getting that understanding that I'm committed to the task and you don't have to worry about micromanaging me. And I know that there will be occasional crises because of the kind of work we're in, but perhaps starting with the conversation that I'm committed to the task. But I also have a deep sense, very deep sense of when I need to pull back and regenerate, because that helps me to be committed to the task. Now you'd have to couch that in your own language and how it would work with you and your supervisors. But I think for someone who's worked in human services, I've led in human service organization where in the middle of the night there's a shooting, we're responsible. And there's a piece of work that we're contracted for to stop retaliation and retaliatory shootings. And we do reentry work, so someone can have a crisis in the middle of the night, someone needs to go to court. There's so many crises that are going on that I know I have a team member who I get text messages from him at 2 a.m. saying there was a shooting, I'm on my way to the hospital, I'm on my way to the site. But then I'll also push him, don't come back in the office or go to the gym or work out. So we have this flexibility. So I don't freak out as much when I get a text from him. Oh, I'll just keep working at it. When I get a text from him, because I know he's also learned how to take long weekends or how to take trips or make sure that he's taking vacation. So there's a real balance. But I do get on him when I get more texts about heading to the hospital than I do I'm heading to the airport or the beach, or my wife and I going out for dinner. But I know he's committed to the task. But I also know if he just says, hey, I need to step back and do something, I can really trust that. So the conversation might really be about trust and work relationships than just self-care. And sometimes, if you're working for a workaholic, self-care sounds like you're not committed to the task. It can sound like a lot of things to them. So I would say not coming in saying, I got to take care of myself sometime, if you know that the work style of your boss is that of workaholism or close to it. But just talk about, I enjoy the work, I'm really committed to the task. I appreciate the fact that you've recognized the timeliness of my reports, whatever it is. I thank you for how you've acknowledged this. But what helps me to stay on top of my game is that from time to time I need to make sure that these things happen. I've got to minimize Saturdays and evenings, or whatever it may be. But I would say starting out with the fact that I like the work, if that's true, I'm committed to this. But when I talk about self-care, that means that to me that means, so I would prefer it if I'm not called on my off days. Unless it's an emergency and it's something that requires my attention and no one else can cover it, I need to really protect those boundaries, because I know a lot of people who work on vacations. I know when I work outside of our organization with joint projects out in the community, we're working on a development project, but years ago it looked like it was going to be an outdoor soccer field. So I was working with a colleague, and I mentioned I was going on vacation. So she said, so how do you like to handle emails when you're on vacation? I said, I don't like to handle emails when I'm on vacation, because the bulk of my work comes to me through email. And she's, oh, that's good to know, because some people like to work. She said, like, when I'm on vacation, I like to get up early and do email. Well, that's work. I can be in Paris. If I've got to do emails, it's no longer a vacation. It's work. So letting people know, because some people assume you work the way they work. And I feel like, hey, this company existed for 50 years before I got here. I'm sure it can handle 5 business days, while I'm out in the way. So I think having a good conversation, because we assume people know our boundaries, and unless we communicate it, it might not. And that's helpful for you as a leader to be able to communicate it. So hopefully that's helpful. The second part is a little more difficult to answer. Any thoughts about the second part of the question? Like, how do you advocate for yourself without sounding confrontational or like you're a troublemaker? I don't know if there's a way to advocate for yourself. Because when you don't, it makes things work really, really well for everybody else but you. Oh yes, you were going to weigh in. Tell me your first name again.
Yeah, Morgan.
Morgan, thank you.
So I was just thinking that when you really state why you're in that workplace or your goals and just prove to others or like relate your tasks to those goals and then prove to others that you are committed and that you can do it, I feel like that might be advocating for yourself without
Sure. Good point, Morgan.
your workplace, like you're trying to be, or you're not trying to be rude in any way. I
Sure.
guess.
That's a very good point. A couple of other things that I would add to that is understand what your complaint process is. Now you're trying to avoid confrontation, and now I'm talking about the comment box. But understand that if you have a supervisor who finds it very difficult to understand your work type, your style, it's important to know what you can do after that, because you don't want to get stuck and say, well, I've spoken to someone and nothing's happened. I think you begin by advocating for yourself by knowing what advocacy looks like. What's the chain of command? You don't want to go over your supervisor's head because that will cause trouble, but you also want to understand the process that if you're bumping heads and your supervisor's not hearing, you need to know how to explain that grievance and take it to the next level. So understand the policies. Take a look at your handbooks to know that. But also, again, every workplace is different. Some folks are really good at giving reviews, others aren't. But it might be nice to have discussions where you just want to check in, and you might not wait for your supervisor to do it. You might just say, I find that I'm newer in this role, if this is the case. It might be helpful to get together maybe once a month to have, coffee or something, just to say things I'm seeing, or to get any feedback from you. And for me, just to give a little feedback about things that I think would help me do my job better. Unfortunately, a requirement for supervision is not necessarily emotional health or emotional maturity. Usually it's tied to a task. And so when you do begin to speak up for yourself, it does rattle the cage a little bit, because people and organizations benefit from your silence and your acquiescence and just showing up and doing the task and just working yourself just to a weary state. So you may not be able to advocate for yourself and your boss at the same time. You may not be able to advocate for yourself and the job at the same time. By that, I mean you are responsible for yourself and not your supervisor. So your primary responsibility is to care for yourself so that you can do your job. And if someone gets upset or frustrated about it, that's incidental. You don't want to do it in a way that makes it easy to backfire on you and show up in your files or get you fired or something. So please understand, I'm not just saying go in there with sort of a cavalier, all hell no, and then just get everybody told off. You might find yourself at the unemployment office. But if your concern is, if I advocate for myself, it's going to upset someone, you can't really worry about that, because that's what buys your silence. And then people can say, well, we didn't know. It's better to sit in that moment of awkwardness than to work in 6 months of frustration. And again, part of leadership is understanding, how do you grow in intense situations or uncomfortable situations? If you know you get frustrated when you talk, it's in your face, you can't hide it, then write it. But find a way to really, really communicate that so that it can't be said, we didn't know that was very difficult for you. Is that helpful to your question? But how do you do that?
Yes, and then what if you don't really feel like you have a choice to leave? You don't really have a choice to move on. Like this is a relationship that you have to keep for professional reasons. And the person or people across the table from you smile and nod at you and say, yes, we hear you. But then they just continue to dictate the same stuff. And so what it turns out feeling like is that meeting was held just so they could check off a box that we held this meeting, we heard your voice, but absolutely nothing is going to change. Then what?
Now here's where my naivete of how this and these relationships work. So you'll have to excuse me if it's not exactly relevant. But there's got to be some way to communicate that back to folks at AmeriCorps, the folks who are responsible for placing you. That's
This is a separate thing.
sure. I mean, wherever. I mean, but in this situation, particularly if it's like in a partnership, somehow there's got to be feedback to know this is a place that's eager to have members come and serve, but it chews them up, or collectively they're not having good experiences. So again, understanding the course that you can take to communicate that. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by if you don't have the freedom of leaving. Is that
It's school related.
Oh, okay, I got you. No, I got you.
Not necessarily even. I mean, there
I got
are
you.
some scenarios
Sure.
related to not nearly this severe, and so just in the kind of spirit and soul of transformational leadership, I'm trying to think of how can these principles and values be applied.
No, that's very good.
Not only in AmeriCorps service,
But-
but also the rest of my and our lives. Again, by virtue of my age, I feel a little less afraid of taking one for the team than some of my younger counterparts. Who maybe early in their careers have more to lose.
Sure. So I got you. That's a great point. A little bit later in some of the talking points that I have, I want to talk about what it looks like to just weather those storms. Because transformational leadership does not necessarily mean getting everything you want, but what happens when you don't, and what does that do for your character, for your professional stamina. So I want to talk about that a little bit later too. One of the things I work to teach my daughter, who's a 23-year-old grad student, is by speaking up, there's no guarantee you get everything you want, but you're not going to get anything that you're just imagining and not saying anything. So the goal is not necessarily getting a W in everything. The W is your voice. The W is at least you've explained it, you've spoken about it, and it makes you wiser in the next situation. And when you're on the other side of the table, it helps you to remember the things that weren't helpful to you. So I want to talk about what happens when, for whatever reason, you don't have another job, this is tied to school, this internship is tied to a degree. How do we learn while in those strict or those strenuous situations? So I'm going to bring that up a little bit later. But that's an important point. We need to understand that. And let me get one more. Did I see your hand up?
Because I feel like I've been in various situations that I think I can relate to in what you have described. And I think what has, like, I didn't get it right away, but like being maybe a couple of years away from the most recent. And then when it comes to partnerships, like in my new role, it's like some partnerships you're not allowed, maybe not allowed, just people don't do what you want them to do, and it creates a frustrating like type of working relationship. So what I've had to, I think, learn and start implementing is understanding what my expectation is. And after somebody keeps showing me like this is what, like this seems to be what you're capable, all that you are capable of, then I have to redirect what my expectation is of this. And just to your piece about silence, like it's not going to do me any good to not speak on what it is. And once I make sure that I said like what needed to be said, I understand that my expectation of you is this thing, but it's still my duty to keep pushing on that. And then the self-care piece to me comes in with support from maybe not that partnership or not that relationship. And just making sure that you're taking care of yourself. And sometimes that has to do with tweaking your expectation.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. And because of a role or position that someone has, or because of what they promised in the interview, we do have perhaps a false expectation. But that is exercising our power to adjust that expectation. Also, I think that's a leveraging point or skill that many people have not employed. And so I think that's how they keep injuring themselves, not because of what the person is doing, but because they keep expecting them to affirm them in some kind of way or support them. And I think if it's a valid expectation, I just believe in the way the forces work in the universe, that you can find folks that will advocate for you, will support you, as long as you're true to what it is that you need. I can remember being in a work situation where I was trying to change my job classification because my colleagues were making like 25% more than I was. And we were sharing some of the same students. I used to be a pre-pharmacy advisor at Wisconsin years ago. And the dean wasn't hearing it, and it was an acting dean. So they could hide behind the fact, well, I'm not the real dean, we're hiring the real dean, and sort of deferring it. But deanships can take a year. But there was a defunct Minority Affairs Committee, and their job was to really be supportive of me and my work. I went to the chair and said, this is what's going to make it difficult for me to stay here and see this as a career. So my chair, who was a full faculty member, who'd been around as long as the acting dean, was able to go to bat for me to get the proper work. So it wasn't just like, I want more money. They said, you know what? Let's let our Minority Affairs Committee review your work, show us your responsibility, bring your job description. They looked at it and said, well, you know what? This isn't even personal. Just by looking at your duties, this should be a program manager too, or whatever it was. So they reclassified my job description and went to the dean and said, because this is what he's doing, this is now what his pay grade should be, and changed it. But I could have left that position, I could have gotten really frustrated, but I got really creative. And so, but that helped my leadership skill as well, because it helped me to develop a skill that I now teach my daughter and others. Let people tell you no 3 times before you really believe it. My grandmother used to tell me that my mom would argue with a stop sign. It goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. I'll go someplace and it'll say that I like grape knee-high. You guys are too young. You don't know what knee-high is, but I like I like grape knee-high. But if I see it in a machine or something, someplace that I'm traveling, I want to get it. But sometimes it'll say out. I can't tell you how many times I pushed a button that said out, and it dropped down. I don't know why. It's like one more in there. Maybe it's a weight thing and it's not triggering it. But I've just trained my brain that just because you sign my check and you say no, doesn't mean that it's going to be no. I try to do it respectfully because there's so many reasons why I've got to cover my backside. Appearing to be a threat, being confident, being black and male. I mean, there's so many things that can push buttons for folks. But I have found that if I know that I've done all that I can to advocate for myself and state what I want, and the answer is still no, I can still sleep at night because I advocated for myself. But to not speak up, to have someone else speak up and see them get something that I think someone should have just offered me, I'm tired of that level of frustration, because my supervisors should not have to read my mind. I should be able to communicate with them. Those are tough things to learn, but it's true. So thank you for sharing that part about adjusting expectations, because we don't always, it's so easy to focus on the individual that's not responding and not really take your own power to say, well, you know what? I'm going to find another mentor. I'm going to find another way to do self-care that can't be said that it interrupts work, but I'm going to still take care of myself. So you don't avoid doing things because they say you can't do it in the middle of the day. You just find other ways to be really creative in doing that, because you got in this role because you're intelligent and you have survival skills and you're professional. All right, I'm going to have us do something. Those are great questions and great feedback. Thank you for participating from the group as well, so that we get to share those experiences. Can you get in groups of 3? Folks online, you're going to be set up to tables as well, and just talk for a few minutes, maybe about 5 minutes. This part will be a little bit fun, but I want to use this as an introduction to my presentation, and then a few minutes. I want you to talk about your best or your favorite, it could be your worst, pet peeves. I want you to talk, I don't know, because peeves are pejorative. I don't know if it's your best one or your worst. Your least favorite, the one that really gets, just talk about just pet peeves. Just in life. Yeah, not at work. Well, you know what, it can be. Yeah, so if you can just move around a little bit so you can get in groups of 3. And if there's a real good one, write it down, because I want to ask for the creative ones. If there's a pet peeve you've never heard of, I want to know about that. So we got about 5 minutes. If we had enough time, I'd love to hear all the pet peeves. I really like talking about pet peeves. I think they're funny to hear what gets to people. But if you heard an interesting pet peeve in your group, can you let me know what that was? And folks online might shoot some to Kyle as well. So if you heard maybe a new pet peeve, but you don't have to say who in your group had it. So I want to get about 2 or 3 of those. Anyone had a real interesting pet peeve? They were all just regular? Yes.
So someone shared that when they go in a public restroom and there's 10 stalls and they're already in a stall, that person coming in goes in the stall right next to them.
Yes.
Same in a gym on the treadmill, like there could be a totally free gym and someone goes right next to you. Like it's an invasion of space.
Yes, I get
Like
you.
we can all relate.
Yes. No, that's good. That's good.
Everyone needs their personal bubble.
Right. Do any of you know why pet peeves are called pet peeves? I mean, a peeve is an annoyance, but a pet peeve is an annoyance that you have that you nurture like a pet. I mean, this is like a dictionary.com thing. So it's like you nurture, like, oh, this is my thing. You talk about it, and even when it doesn't happen to you, and someone says, I was at the treadmill, and someone got right next to me, it's like, I know, I hate that. You cut them off. It's their thing. It might even be a pet peeve. They might just say it happened. And then you kind of go off. So a pet peeve is something that not only that it's annoying, but you nurture it like you would a pet. You feed it, you stroke it, you wash it, you walk it, you let it crawl on the furniture, you give it a little name, and you're going to protect it at all costs because it's a pet. One of the best lessons I learned growing up was watch the things that get on your nerves. Like pay special attention to them, because typically if something peeves you, you try to avoid that at all costs. And I didn't really understand the value of this lesson because I might have been a teenager. Well, over the last 40 years, I processed that. Because sometimes what aggravates you is justifiable. And sometimes it's not. It's just you and your peeve. For example, let me just ask this. Do you think that certain pet peeves are familial, or inherited? Like, do you have a peeve that your parents had? Or a sibling had? I know I have some that my mother had, but like my mother, one of her pet peeves, and this is interesting, my mom, I'm not laughing at her diagnosis, I'm just laughing because I'm thinking about something she says. My mom she struggles, she suffers from Alzheimer's. But her peeves are still there. Now, fortunately, she knows her kids and grandkids. She doesn't know what year it is or who's in office or anything like that. But the peeves are still there. I remember I went to college with my mother. I might have said that so we went to school together. My mom cannot stand people cracking gum. So we were in a statistics class or some class. She wrote a woman a note. Like, what is my mother writing? Like, that's not a theory. What's she writing down? And that's not standard deviation. And she handed this note, and it was an older black woman. I thought, oh, it's about to go down. And after class, the woman started laughing. She said, my mother can't stand gum cracking. So when you gave me that note, I started laughing because I thought, I know better than this. But listen, you can have the cure to cancer, but if you tell it to my mother while you're cracking gum, she didn't want to hear it. She can't stand people talking when they got food in their mouth. So you can have the answer to world hunger. But she's like, you know what? When you finish that candy bar, you come back and tell me what that answer is. Because right now, I can't hear anything you're saying. I'm thinking, what is your home training that you're sitting there talking to me, and you got chocolate caramel and peanuts bouncing up and down, on your and so sometimes I'll do things just to stir her pet peeves because it brings a part of her out of the dementia that reminds me that, okay, this is still mine. Like, she'll swing on me if I do some of this stuff, if I make certain noises around her. Now, there's no law against talking with your mouth full, and there's no law against cracking gum. Although my mother would advocate for laws. That's really her stuff. But she will determine, I've watched her determine her interaction with people and relationship with people based upon how many of those pet peeves, how many of those buttons they're going to push. Okay, what does pet peeves and gum and all this stuff have to do with anything? What we need to find out in life is there are things that will irk us, will peeve us. But what we've got to ascertain is this my stuff? Is it their stuff? Does it go away because I separate myself? Who's responsible for this? Because in the workplace, I've watched people just unravel by something that was just something that peeved them, but it didn't necessarily hold up their careers. And they built this whole case around it because it gets on their nerves and it keeps them from really having grit and really sticking to the task. Because in our work, we've got to have grit. And grit it's courage, it's resolve, it's strength, it's character, we've got a great task ahead of us. But often it's the small things that irk us that will make us not thrive in a situation. And it may or may not be intentional, but you've got to be able to own it or handle it so that you're not thrown off your game when it comes to really completing your task. And so first thing I just want to put out there is just think a little bit, process about things that really are difficult for you at work. And just ask, is that really your thing? Is it their thing? Is it a hazard in the workplace? Does it impede you from doing your job? Does it impede someone from working with you or from supervising you? Because you are in a better position to deal with confrontation if you understand the nature of what that confrontation is. It seems like a real small thing, but I've watched where people have not had the ability to adjust their expectations because something is a pet peeve or an annoyance, and they built this whole case in their minds about why they can't be in this situation, be a part of this team, because this thing continues to happen. And then you're never really talking about your stuff or their stuff. You're talking about something else, and it makes it very difficult to really move ahead. So when you struggle, is it something that really keeps you from thriving in that workplace? Is it something that really makes it difficult for you to be professional? Is it really something this huge, really large, or does it just really get on your nerves? And there's nothing like a small thing that's blown up to a large thing in our workspace that hinders us from really thriving there. So think about that for a moment. When you're supervising someone, they may process something differently. They may do something very differently, but it's not necessarily what's intended. I know as an African American person, it annoys me. This may not be my pet peeve, but it certainly insults me. If I hand you my credit card or hand you my $5 for something, and my hand is still out, and you put it down on the counter, I'm not coming back in. I'm pissed. I'm like, okay, you're not gonna get it by touching me. You're not gonna get black by touching me. So again, that's something I'm making in my head. That doesn't even mean what someone's thinking. But I know among a lot of African Americans, that's really real. If we go in and I hand you money for coffee, and my hand is out, and you put the stuff down, and my nickels and stuff are rolling around, I might even just leave the money on the counter or something, but I just tell myself, I'm not coming in anymore, I'm not patronizing it. But I've talked with that with friends from other cultures, and I've had people tell me, where my culture is very disrespectful to put something in someone's hand, so we put it on the counter because of X, Y, and Z. It was not intended to be what I thought it was. It's just it was the clash. I won't even say of two cultures, but two perspectives, two different realities. But you can begin to think about what that is and build a whole narrative around it. What I've seen in much of my career has been the narrative that people have built around interactions that have nothing to do with the real interaction. I still need their coffee, they still need my $1.75, and we've had this separation because we've misunderstood what's important to each other. But I see that working, I see that in the workplace a lot. So the first thing I would say is if you're going to really have grit, and because there's no perfect environment, and even if it were perfect, you screwed it up when you showed up, because we're imperfect. So even if it's a perfectly sterile environment, we bring our stuff into that environment. So just process that a little bit as you're thinking about how you may perceive situations, because here's the reality. We will always have imperfect supervisors and coworkers, but the most difficult thing for us to do as transformational leaders is to see and understand our stuff. And it's in seeing and understanding our stuff that helps the situation change, because sometimes, your supervisor may need to change, or the work environment needs to, but as you were saying earlier, sometimes your expectation, or you've got to change in order to really make that situation workable. And that piece is difficult because it feels like a pet peeve. And a pet peeve is just, you're projecting, and what's so hard is the people who are in the stall next to you or on the treadmill next to you or just enjoying their double mint gum, they have no idea that that's your stuff, that that's your expectation. And what they're doing, which is what they do all the time, it's not negative, it's not insensitive, it's not meant to be damaging. They don't know that you built up this course, this frustration, this stuff inside you, and they don't even understand, well, why didn't they speak, or why are they short, or why is this going on? So I want us to understand that in being transformative leaders, transformational leaders, it means that, and this takes maturity, it requires a real deep look at ourselves, because that's half the situation when we're interacting with folks. And so this kind of gets at the question you were asking earlier about what happens when you're in a situation and things don't change. How do you develop character? By learning how to keep your mouth. Now, again, this once you've spoken on the situation, but how to find other ways to succeed or find other jobs or find other allies. There's a skill set that's learned from that. There's character development that's learned from that I think would really serve us well. And so it leads me to my next point. I was researching online, and I've been doing this for a while, but just this whole refinery process of gold and silver. And not that I have it or investing in it, but just like what makes gold 24 karat or 12 or 20. Sometimes I geek out and I just want to find how things are done, particularly how they're made. But there's a process by which several of them, one is called smelting and then it's milling. But when you're trying to create pure gold, like 24 karat gold, there's a heating process, a chemical process too, but I won't pull all my information out on you. But there's a process that allows the alloys and some of the junk, some will call it dross, but it allows it to come to the surface. And it's in getting rid of the impurities that come to the surface that allows the product to increase itself. And so this process, I call it scum. That's what it looks like. When I watch the videos of it, it just looks like the scum coming up to the top. And so I have this two ways of looking at things. So if we're trying to get to a place of real pureness, our getting to our real selves, the true, the best product that we can bring to work or life, heat or intensity is going to happen. I mean, that's just par for the course. It's going to happen. But the question is, what do we do with it when it's coming up? And so I say that there's these two processes. So imagine if there's a bucket of molten gold right here. We're heating it up and all this stuff is coming to the top. If you understand that this is the process by which you get to pure gold, you skim the stuff off the top. You skim the scum and you get rid of it because the more it comes up. But if you don't like your stuff being exposed and you don't like your scum coming to the surface, you're going to scheme or scam to push it back down and say, I don't have an issue, I'm fine, I don't care what anybody thinks, my feelings aren't hurt, I'm not insensitive. And so either you learn to acknowledge it and deal with it and help to remove it, or you just push it down before anybody sees it, but it's still real and it's still there. And so sometimes work, relationships, places where we're vulnerable and we're really hopeful are the places that really push us to make what's inside of us really there. I would love a world that's all jacked up and it just needs to adjust to me. But the truth is, a lot of times it brings out the impurities in me, the anger, the frustration, which means I'm going to either respond to it, I'm going to be passively aggressive, I'm not going to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about everybody else, talk to everybody else about it. I'm not going to bring it up to my supervisor, but I'm going to tell all my coworkers, don't go work with them because they don't like people, they're all about themselves. And their response can be to your action and not to you as a person. And so I want to ask you just to think about this. I won't even have you do this in groups necessarily, but just take a moment to think about this for maybe the next 3 or 4 minutes. What's your MO? What's your methodology that when something is revealed about your character or your style, your performance, that really has to do with some things that are either come out of immaturity or lack of experience that really comes to the top? Are you the type of person that says, let's deal with it, the scum is here, we're going to skim it off because this makes the process better? Or because somehow you feel vulnerable and exposed and you don't like the person who witnessed the scumming, or you just can't deal with it? You compartmentalize stuff. You just sort of push it back down to the bottom of the pot and pretend like it's not there. Because how we process things determines really how we thrive at work, how we thrive in relationships, and how we really move at being transformational leaders. So just think about that for a moment. Just take a moment and think. And some of this is really family stuff. Like in my family setting, it's like, okay, it's up, it's on the surface, let's deal with it, let's talk about it. You just said this, and you said it kind of tongue in cheek, and you said every Thanksgiving, so we're gonna talk about it now. What do you mean it's not mine? What do you mean this is not true? What's this secret you keep alluding to? There are some people who are just really good at saying, let's get it out of the way. Like in my family, now it's not always good because we hurt each other in the process sometimes, but we can argue a point. I mean, like finger point. And my mom and sister are both social workers, and so we throw classifications on each other like that. You projecting, according to what's that book called DSR-2? Y'all know what that stuff is. According to this, you're a narcissist. So we start throwing all this stuff at each other, but we get it out, have a knockdown, drag out, but then afterwards we're like, Okay, we're meeting for pizza tonight, right? Except we're still good. Because when it comes up, we're trying to skim it off. When it's we're trying to skim it off so that we're okay. Other families are taught that's insulting, that's disrespectful. Don't talk about the obvious. Ignore some of those shortcomings. Don't let your stuff come up and don't identify anybody else's. And so just push that back down. We bring that. If you're a person who's like, okay, look, the scum is on the top, so look, supervisor, I need to talk to you. Coworker, I need to tell you something. That doesn't always work with someone. But then other folks who like to talk about it and folks are always pushing it back down, they're like, they never want to talk about the real issues, so we never get at anything. And so it just keeps re-injuring us. So I just want you to think about how you process stuff. And then a little bit later, I'm going to ask you about maybe how your boss does or family members do. But just think, and I'm not going to ask you to report back out, but just take a moment and process when the intensity comes to your life and that scum comes to the surface. Are you a skimmer or a scammer? Why is this important? Keep working on it. Keep thinking about it. Skimmers don't like scammers, and scammers can't stand skimmers. And knowing how you approach it and how maybe your supervisor or spouse, significant other, child approaches it could really put a finger on what the tension may be in the situation. And I think that this is important because if we're going to have grit, and that's sort of an archaic word, but if we're going to really commit to our task, being more aware of our environment, ourselves, and how others interact can teach us skills of how to navigate and really build teamwork. Because I can guarantee you, if you are a skimmer, you'll probably never be in a group with just skimmers unless it's some kind of support group. You're gonna always be with people that, I'm not ready to see that, I'm not ready to see that, I'm not ready to see it. And if you're folks who are like, don't put your finger on my stuff, please don't call my stuff out, even nicely, you're going to be in places and rooms with truth tellers. That's why a lot of times truth tellers are called whistleblowers. Like every family has one. Like there's always someone that's going to be like, all right, let's just stop the crap. This is what's going on. And sometimes a little brown liquor helps them to be a little bit more truthful. So we can say they're only, well, it's not really true because they're drinking. And that's really just giving them the strength to say what everybody else knows, they're just afraid. But a lot of times that plays out at work also. So let me just ask this. I'm not going to ask you like what your methodology is, but I either want to know if you have questions about this or have you seen some of that play out in your work settings or personal settings? You don't have to say which one it is, but have you seen the clash of those who really let's deal with it and those who don't? Have you seen the clash of that? Let's just start with work. Have you seen the clash of that at work? And I won't tell you what side. I won't ask you what side of the spectrum you're on, but how regularly do you see that? Weekly? Every day. And the interesting thing about that is it's that whatever that personality style is, it won't just interact with you, but anyone else who has that similar type of temperament. Now again, there's no perfect way of fixing it, but I think in just naming things, it lets you realize, okay, maybe this isn't personal, maybe it's stylistic, maybe it's familial, and at least I know how to navigate it. Because part of being a transformational leader is to know, again, how to adjust not only expectations, but reactions within yourself. Because if something seems personal, you react that way. But if you're able to understand it a little bit as a temperance or as a different way of approaching things, it makes you less volatile because it's not so personal. How about on personal levels, family levels? How many of you have? I've seen it a lot because although my mom and sister, we can argue and say the same, there are others that are not like that. My wife's family does not do that. If you do what we do, over one meal, you don't talk for 2 or 3 years. Because we got married, my wife was like, what's wrong with y'all? And I can't believe you all can talk like that to each other. And it's never name calling or cussing each other out or anything. But she says, if we did that, we wouldn't talk. But I have to be careful because she wasn't raised in that environment. So I can't just say, well, by marriage, you're gonna have to come into this heat. This is what I have to make sure I adjust things because that's not the way, that's not helpful. And it's destructive. So understanding what's appropriate and how you get at things is part of transformational leadership because it is not just pushing your way. At the end of the day, as a transformational leader, you want to get the task done, but you want people to grow also in the process. So if you understand that that's what goes on, do you help someone skim without throwing the scum all over the whole team? And if someone's going to scheme, do you not call them out as being crooked, but it's just their way of dealing with stuff, and they just need the right time or the right space to kind of to kind of do that. But I just think just understanding that has really helped me, because I can stick to a task if I know what I'm dealing with. But if it's only personal, then I always feel attacked, and then I'm not in a posture to really make the situation better. And sometimes your greatest leadership opportunity will be in places of duress, places of frustration, and you can have to move that needle a little bit, or help people think differently, or to know how to thrive when people are not seeing things your way. So let me just ask, are there any questions or even pushback? I mean, I'm not asking you to buy this as theory, but it's just something that I've practiced and I've seen. Yes?
So I actually want to share something that I think deals with pet peeves in the skimmer and scammers.
Sure.
So it's this little exercise of life, and it's called the 4 agreements.
Can you speak a little louder? I want to make sure everyone can hear you.
So it's called the exercise of life, the 4 agreements. So in life, to remove toxicity from your life, there's 4 steps. The first one is to be impeccable with your word, so knowing who you are. The second one,
I'm sorry, you said impeccable with your work, a word?
Word. So knowing who you are and what you do. And the second one is to don't take things personally. Third, don't make assumptions. And then the fourth is to be the best you can be. So with those 3 other agreements, and just in life in general, so being in the moment and mindful. And the author of this book, actually, it's called Rao Kamir, I think. Don't quote me on that though. But it just really helps in life, and maybe even with our work at hand too, because you really try to look at the situation, not only in your point of view, but others, and it really makes things less toxic. So I just think that really goes well with what we're learning today and what you're talking about today.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That's good. That's helpful. I appreciate that. I also think that there's so many intersections in the workplace. There's economic, cultural, ethnic, class. There's so many things that are very different. I'm finding that there are ways that millennials, and I'm trying to be careful to not really generalize groups, but I found that there are things that millennials have in common, irrespective of, let's just say, of their race, gender, ethnicity. There are just certain ways that they see things. The younger generation, I'll call it so that it sounds, you know, because I don't mean anything negative or pejorative when I say millennials, but I find younger generations are more honest with what they feel and what they think. The people who mentored me said, shh, everybody knows that Uncle Arthur drinks, but we're not going to say it. Everyone kind of knows that this person hurts someone or children, but we're not necessarily going to say it. But in younger generations, they're like, hey, let's get this out, let's get this. So there are things that you may want to talk about in the workplace or with your bosses, and generationally, because of how they were just taught about the workplace, it's like, we don't talk about that. It's almost like you're talking about politics or religion or something at work, when all you're saying is, this system is archaic. Like, what do you mean? I designed this. My Aunt Betty came in and helped me put this stuff together. And so I see myself as sort of an in-between person, because the people who shaped me were from that generation. But by having a child who's millennial, they're helping to shape you still too. And so I'm realizing, for the early part of my leadership, I didn't want anything negative to be said about my punctuality, my state of work, because I knew I was so committed to the task that I felt anything that demeaned any part of my work questioned my commitment or my professionalism. So it's very difficult for people to give me feedback. I don't care if you're my boss, I don't care if you're the board. I might not say anything very flippant, but in my mind I'm thinking, well, what have you ever grown? What have you ever created? What have you ever done? Who are you? And that's not healthy. But it wasn't until I realized that there are people who are saying things because they wanted to help me. And so depending on how you're perceiving this information, even the things that are constructive could be seen as very negative, demeaning. And so we have to really find out what that's like. So I think if you're dealing with someone who's a little bit slightly older, being called out or having things pointed out could seem very, very difficult. But the flip side is, again, depending on how they were trained, you know, my generation was sort of trained in this, well, just suck it up. Because the people who trained me were like folks who lived through the Great Depression and stuff like that. And so, you know, if you just got one shoe, get some masking tape and tape that other foot up, and, you know, be at work. I mean, I knew people who talked about driving backwards to work because their transmission didn't work, because they worked at this job at the post office every day, or, for 35 years. I mean, they literally told me a story of putting a car in reverse and driving 30 miles to work. Nobody would do that today. Be like, you know what, I'm gonna work from home. Or tweet your boss and say, hey, I'm not coming in. I got, my car is broken. And so I think we have to understand that some of this is just really, it's generational also. But the point I'm trying to raise is, if we understand that every less than perfect or ideal interaction is not always personal. And I find that that's where productivity really gets hemmed up, when people really think someone's out to insult me or question me. And so it really hinders us from really getting better, because our coworkers, our leaders, our team members should be the people who are committed to the same task, should be able to say something that helps us to get better. If we're on the same team, we're playing a sport or working on an activity, we should be able to say, hey, can you pick that up? Or hey, I've got another thing coming down the pipeline. There should be some way that we can communicate with each other, because we're on the same team, that's not heard or received as, hey, you're insulting me because you're telling me, I'm doing my work wrong. I'm really slow in doing this. But I think owning our part is what's really, really important. And by understanding these things, I feel like it's made me a better supervisor, but it's also made me a better person. It makes it easier to share things with, because you don't want to be the kind of person, where people have some good information for you and then they won't share it because you're so volatile that they know you're just going to blow up and just make it. There you go again. Every feedback is not based on those things. There are enough things that are based on negative things, but there's enough of it that's not. I just don't want us to be stuck there. So, Maura, I appreciate what you're saying. Can you just repeat those 4 things too? You said agreement to know your worth?
Yeah, so be impeccable, don't take things personally, don't make assumptions, and be the best you can be. So as a person and with those other 3 agreements.
That's really good. Other thoughts about either scheming and skimming, or about the ownership we need to take on what pushes buttons for us, particularly in the workplace? Because I want you to have good experiences where you are. Thoughts about that? Or examples of where you think, I did all these things, I made these agreements, I did this stuff, and I still got, screwed over. So you can even push back against it. But thoughts about the importance of taking that area of responsibility, or that level of responsibility? I think for those of you that are in supervisory roles, or who aspire to be in supervisory roles, I think the practice of asking people to either recite the values of the organization, of your agency, I think is very important. But then I think the next question should be, tell me how well of a job, or good of a job do I, as your supervisor, how well do I do in empowering you to live out these values, or to work out these values? I think that's a very honest feedback loop. Employers rarely do that. We will drill our staff on, okay, what's our mission statement? What are our values? But we rarely ask, is there anything supervisory, systemic, training, dollars, resources, are there any things that we do that impede you from doing this? I think that that's a very healthy question. And I don't know exactly how this works within your organizations if you are being supervised, to suggest a feedback loop. Like, can we together as a team not only talk about the values and why they're important, but can we talk about if there are any systemic realities that impede us from doing this or becoming this? Because if the gathering is meant to ask and answer that question, it takes it off of the one-on-one, or maybe you can have that discussion. I think that's a very important thing, because it's one thing to think that you're working with someone who just doesn't want to do the job. And if we as supervisors can get beyond our own selves and out of our own junk, our own stuff, the thought that someone feels frustrated that I've hired them for a job and I'm oblivious to the fact that I'm hindering them from doing the job that they were drawn to because of similar values, that's a real loss. Because you can always hire someone to do a task. It's a more difficult task to hire someone who really loves the values, they want to live into the values, and that more than the office space, the window space, the pay is drawing them. To not develop that person, to do the opposite of that, to really demean them. No, I shouldn't say demean because that sounds so intentional. To dispirit them, to demoralize them by not acknowledging that you're blocking that, you might ruin someone's career because they might decide, if this is what we do in this line of work, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to go into sales, or I'm going to go into another area of work. I'm going to do something that just has to do with computers or art, and I'm not going to really work in this area. So how we interact in this space, particularly our first or our newer positions, is really key because it sets the course of what we really do. I was an econ major. I was a double major of econ and Afro-American history. And I worked at 2 banks all through college because I thought that's what I really wanted to do. My last semester of school, I had a bunch of credits to graduate, like 19 credits, and I had 7 classes. And the bank that was really flexible and worked with my schedule couldn't do it that last semester. So I took a part-time job working for a program on campus that helped to provide mentoring to students of color. I absolutely loved that job. And I had a great supervisor who was extremely intuitive. So we'd hear the students talk about their difficulty. They're moving from Gary, Detroit, Chicago, places from where we recruited them, to Madison, where there were maybe 500 black students on a campus of 43,000 students. I mean, like, those are real numbers. And so we'd give ourselves to them, but on Friday afternoons, he would just sit down and just process, not just our tasks, but what's going on in our lives. And he was so insightful. He would say things that would help me, sort of make these decisions. That experience was so important to me that I made a decision to not work in traditional business, but I wanted to work in human services, student services, cross-cultural services. I never had work experience in that area, but because it was such a nurturing environment, it shaped what I would do professionally for the next 35 years. A poor experience can make someone never return to this kind of work. And so this might be a good time, for those of you who are supervisors or aspiring to be supervisors, to ask yourself, but more importantly, to ask those that you supervise, does this environment demoralize, or does it build you up to want to do this work? When you go home, do you want to do this more or do this less? When you dream of your future, do you dream of doing what I'm doing or what my supervisors are doing, or something not like this at all? Later on in life, when I was making a career shift, I wanted to move into something a little differently. I went back and found a person who was my academic advisor and my boss in college, and asked that same former supervisor to just meet with me. He still dropped wisdom that shaped more specifically what I'm doing today. You have the power of creating that kind of environment. I never thought of work as work, because no matter what I gave out to other people, as a supervisor, he gave that back to me and taught me how to find it in other places. And so he could actually make a greater demand. I had to be careful with self-care. I had 19 credits, 7 classes. I was still, working for him. But I would have done part of that work for free because of what I got in that place. And so again, I want us to begin to think about what kind of environment are we creating for folks? Because if it adds value to them, that refreshed individual is going to be better for the folks that they serve. And that really was the case with me. I felt that I was a better peer mentor because I had places and space that I was poured into. And a lot of us in the workplace we're not taught that that's really the purpose of the workplace. It's where we get tasks done. You show up, you get assigned, duties, you come back and report on it, but it's not a place where you really feel seen, heard, valued, and invested in. And so it's not too late to implement that in the workplace. And it's not too late to ask that too. Again, I don't know what that looks like in your context, but it could be, how do we make suggestions around here? How do we get new things out? In this workshop, we heard that there are places where people just sort of gave feedback about what would help them do their jobs better. But there's a way that you can suggest those things, and that if it goes around enough or enough people say, yeah, that would be really important, that begins to change the workplace. And when that happens, then your reach through the people you're serving or with the people you're serving becomes way, way more effective because you have more to give them. You can listen, you can invest in them and help to develop them as well. But I think that piece is really, really important. And I think supervisors have got to really, really understand that. They've got to remember that people are not drawn to this task because they just want to be worked to a frazzle. They really want to make a difference. I didn't mean to talk as much as I am. Questions or thoughts about that? Would you like to work in an environment that gave back to you like that? There's a place that you could be refreshed? If your supervisors won't do it, find ways to do it with your peers. Because again, you can't make your supervisors do things. That's kind of, sometimes that's counterproductive. But you can find a way to get together after work, before work, have lunch together and just talk, call out each other's good things that we're doing. I noticed I saw you with this student, I saw you with this person, how you interact with them. Made me want to do my job better. It made me realize, that takes extra time. Now I know why it takes you longer to get things done, because you really see people and you want them to be heard and felt and cared for. And that's why the folks you serve do a much better job. So if it doesn't come top down, find a peer way to do that. Because if our supervisor couldn't show up, we as peer mentors knew how to talk among each other, to talk about the issues, to dump and really encourage each other. Thoughts, questions? Yes.
I was thinking about that, like when you were talking about like the self-care episode, like our organization is really good about self-care, and like my supervisor always says, oh, what are you doing for self-care? And I'm like, I don't know, like, so like I have to like be more intentional about my self-care. Like my job would be like, no problem, whatever. But I just need to figure out like what that is for me. I really did enjoy that, like that self-care.
No, that's great. So they will support you in doing that, but then you got to figure out what that means and what that looks like. That's really good. So you don't think you take advantage of that space or that opportunity, those opportunities enough?
Kind of like, I mean, when I have to, like if I'm sick, like I'll like, okay, I need to take off, and my job is like, okay, feel better, like that's not the thing, like we have limited sick days or whatever. But like when it comes to like, okay, I need to take a break. No, I'm like, okay, no, I need to do more, or like, okay, what can I do to refresh? I'm like, I don't know what I need to do to refresh. So like, that's just what I need to do is like, how do I, like, when you talk about self-care, like, how do I bring my whole self to the table, like, so I can refresh, so back on Monday, I can be like, okay, here, I'm ready to go.
No, that's really important. So let me just suggest this. If you don't know how to take your whole self away from the table to become refreshed or to recreate, then you can never bring your whole self there, because your whole self is not the clock you punch or the amount of emails you pour through. That's not your whole self. Your whole self is the part that's rejuvenated so that you can come back with greater clarity. So I'll speak to your real, I'll speak to the loyal, dedicated worker part of you. It is actually professional development to find out what refreshes you so that you can step back and take away from it. Because you will find a different level of work, not just in terms of hours and inputs of hours or cases or that you work with, but the parts of your mind that you're able to bring to work by just doing that. So you're actually helping the job, you're helping those you serve, you're helping yourself and the mission to figure out how and where you step away to get refreshed. That's an important part of your task. And sometimes for folks who have a difficult time stepping away and refreshing, they have to begin to see it almost as a task in order to make them take it real seriously. But because you're so key to it, do it while you can. Because what happens is things can creep up on us and we may not realize we're that overwhelmed, we're that close to burnout, and then it's really difficult to adjust. I believe that there's a lot of strength and truth that's told in community and inside our families, our friends and circles. So I would encourage you to ask people who know you well, when do I seem like I'm refreshed to you, or like I'm really laying back? And they might say, when you're drawing, or when you're cooking, or you always talk about you love planting flowers, but you're hardly ever in your garden. You can ask people, like, when have you seen me like real relaxed? Because there might be things that you could do more of, and it didn't register with you that it's a thing of relaxation. So you may not dive more deeply into that. So you might want to ask folks, knowing me, what looks like self-care? Like, what am I doing when it looks like I'm really taking care of myself? And it might make you consider those things more seriously, because you just didn't realize that that's what it was, because like a task, it just came so easy to you. I know a lot of people would love to switch places with you and say, "What, your boss supports it?" I know what I want to do. I know what self-care looks like. And you might just ask people who are really good at self-care. to say, well, for me, it looks like these things. And you might look and say, well, that means nothing. But one of those, yeah, I think that would be fun. I think that would be refreshing. But again, really do work in understanding that, because it will help you to help others to do the same thing. Yes?
Going off with that, with the self-care, I feel like whatever really makes you happy. So, because some people find happiness to be rejuvenating or to give them a different peace of mind. So, if you do whatever makes you happy, then to me that is self-care in a way. I mean, I get it that this work makes us happy, but doing it all the time, we do need a different form of happiness too. So.
Mm-hmm. My work is so ongoing that I found, for whatever reason, cooking helps me to relax. Now, I'm not a great cook, but I love doing it. But from planning the meal, to watching the videos on YouTube to find out whose recipe I'm gonna try, to hunting down the ingredients in the store, the only part I don't like is like the cleanup afterwards. But my wife said, look, if you cook, I'll clean, I'll do the dishes. And so she'll ask me when I'm in the kitchen, is this relaxing to you? Because I hate this. Even the thought of finding, it's just stressful. Like, let's just order something. And so early on, I thought, well, maybe this is work, maybe. But what's relaxing to you might really look like work to someone else. But I've learned now that if I'm feeling extra stressed, you know what? I'm gonna go home and cook something. Because in the process, by the time I'm finished, I feel better. I thought through things. I've been creative, but I brought closure because this meal is done. My work is so open-ended. You can serve someone, and the next thing you know, their siblings are on your caseload or their parents. Find that even if people say, oh, that's work, I wouldn't want to go out and plant gardens, or I wouldn't want to go out and reorganize stuff. I wouldn't want to go out and find out the thing that really does make you happy, that does that has that level of space, because it doesn't have to be anything like taking up hot air ballooning or something that's that costly, but it might be real simple things. It could be a ride or a drive or a bike ride or a written, but find out what that is, because you can't hold people responsible for not caring for yourself, and you have the time and the space to do it, and it's for your good. Well, let me just bring this back full circle just in closing. In life and family, in work, there's going to be intensities. And it's either going to make your stuff come. You go to work knowing what everybody else's crap is. Because yours is on the bottom of this pot that's going to be gold, it's hidden, so we don't know. And we don't know some of that stuff until the intensity really shows up. Like, because I'm such a people person, I didn't know that I was defensive. Because I like people. I'm the recovering class clown. People like to be around me. But when my dross started coming up to the top and people would say, you might want to skim them, I'm like, skim? What are you saying? And it wasn't pretty until I understood the process. So it will happen. Your response to your stuff will help you to work with people whose other stuff. Because don't forget, when you show up, if there's 15 people at work, they've all got a pot of something that's boiling. And they're either skimming it or they're pushing it back down. And sometimes the variation of how that happens causes clashing, but you're responsible for you. And so just take a look at how you handle just your own personal crises, because that helps you to become a transformational leader. No one else is fully to blame. You're able to have a fresher perspective that makes your office stronger, your mission stronger, but it puts you in a better position to help other people on their lives and in their journeys. We dropped a bonus podcast about a young African-American male teacher doing his internship. It's really interesting to listen to that, so please catch that. I think I've got one more episode that we're going to be putting up soon, like how do you build upon your AmeriCorps experience. And if you hadn't listened to the other ones, it's a chance to really get caught up. But the last two that we dropped, the last three, including the one with this student, it's just really helpful in thinking about self-care and how you deal with difficult situations. So perhaps having sat through this discussion may help you listen to that with a new or fresh perspective. So please do that. I know you all are busy folks, but thanks for coming out today. I appreciate the work that you do. It's important to our communities and to our state, and I continue to hold you all in my thoughts because you're helping to make what would otherwise be a dismal state better. Even with the issues that we have, it would be a lot different without you doing the kind of work that you're doing. So I appreciate you. Take care of yourselves because we really need you. All right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.